You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate, on Desert Rock FM. Welcome back to the Batuta Advocate radio show, recording live here in downtown Batuta, down here in Budgie Smuggler Studios. You're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, and Errol Parker. How are you, Errol?
Good, mate. Always good to get up and do an interview. I love doing these.
Now, in 2020 and into 2021, a lot of industries have been affected, as we kind of mention each week. Someone that we're interviewing has in some way been affected, as we all have. But one industry that has been rocked to its core, pardon the pun, is live music. A lot has changed for that industry in the last 18 months. And a lot of people are now sitting at home reminiscing on a time when we could all go to gigs. And that day will come again, but, it's a waiting game for now, and there's a lot of things that need to happen before that. Today's guest probably has a different experience and looks at live music and gigs a bit differently to the rest of us after a lifetime backstage and bumping in and bumping out and everything else that comes with it. Today we're joined by Tana Douglas, live from LA, and Tana is commonly known as, and probably officially, the world's first female roadie. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Now, that title, first female roadie, was that getting thrown around when you first kind of got into the game?
No, I don't think anyone wanted to admit there was a female roadie back then. It was just like, she's here. I don't know what we're going to do with her. Is she going to go the distance? Let's not make any statements until we see where this is going to go. I sort of hit the ground running. And so I didn't really have time to look around and see if there were any other females out there. I was just with this crew that were all men. And it didn't really occur to me at the time. And then, it was probably a few years. But, when I started working with international bands, like for ACT after I'd left AC/DC, they were surprised to see a female, and they're going, oh, this must be an Australian thing. Yeah. So it sort of started then. And then over the years, I didn't come across any. So it took quite a while. It was like mid-'80s before I actually even did a tour with another female. But, so at the time, I was just busy working,
So that was way back when. That was when...
Pub rock.
Yep.
Pub rock was the era when you hit the ground?
Oh, it was huge.
Yep.
Yeah, huge pub rock era. Absolutely. Why I didn't have time to look around was because, once I got with ACDC, some weeks we do 14 shows. It was just outrageous. You didn't have time to do anything, let alone go, oh, who else is doing whatever for whatever other band? It just didn't happen.
Now, aside from that title we introduced you with, first female roadie in the world, your stripes on the road and the bands you work with is of far more kind of notoriety and far more notable than anything else that we can, any other record you broke. To start your career with bands like AC/DC, can you tell us how that all went down?
Yeah, I actually, the first band I worked for took me out of Sydney. I was living in Sydney at the time. They were a Melbourne band called Fox. And I started working with them, and they actually offered me a job and said, when they'd come up and visit Sydney, they offered me a job and said, you want to move back down to Melbourne with us and keep working, So I said, yeah. And unfortunately, that meant I had to move back in with my mother, which was a bit awkward, working for a rock and roll band and living back with your mother for the first time in however many years. So, when the offer came up for a band and somewhere to live, it was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm in. Get me out of the house again, please.
So how do you get into it? It isn't like these jobs are really advertised in the back of newspapers, or are they?
No, they're absolutely not. To begin with, it's probably about 80% personality, and then you've got to be able to do your dues, But what happened was I'd done a brief production thing with Philippe Petit. He did a commando tightrope walk across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I'd been up at the Nimbin Festival, and I got invited to come down and help out with that. So that was my first taste of production, so to speak, even though it wasn't with music. Then, within 6 months, I was back down in Sydney, and after I'd had a bit of a rough time in the cross, and that hadn't gone well for me, and I decided I needed to get out and change a few things for safety's sake, I moved in with a couple of young girls, and one of them they were both into clubbing and stuff like that. So it changed my whole outlook. And I went to the Whiskey A Go-Go, and the first night I went down there was a really well-known Australian road crew person called Wayne Swampy Jarvis. He saw me there, and he knew the girls, and he said, "Oh, you've never been to a show before? Here, come and sit here. We'll stand you next to the sound desk, and that's the best place to watch the show from." So I'm standing there and I'm looking at these guys. I really didn't have a clue of what they were doing. I didn't know what it was really, and I couldn't ask them because I was busy working. And then I saw all these other people coming on and off stage. And, when there was a break between sets, I asked him, I said, who are all these people and what are they doing? And he's like, well, they're roadies, and I'm like, roadies, and then he's gone, they all travel with us and we're leaving tomorrow. We're going down to Melbourne and then Adelaide. And so I've gone, well, hang on a minute. You travel, you get to listen to music and you get paid. I'm in. I'm thinking, this is really good. This is something I could do, So that was my first inkling to it. Then I got offered, it was funny actually. It was the same girl that invited me down to that show wanted to get back to Melbourne. So we took her down to this band Fox that came up to Sydney. She was going to try and get a free lift back down with them, because she didn't have any money. So it was like if she got in the truck with the crew, she could get a free ride back down to Melbourne. So we went to the show and the plan was to get her this free ride and, get her back to Melbourne. And, everyone's drinking and carrying on and partying and stuff, and not a lot of work's getting done at all,
Yeah.
So I popped the question. It's like, guys, she really needs to get back to Melbourne. Can she go with you guys? And one of the guys in the band, Peter Laffey, he looks over at the stage and he says, if those guys get out of here tonight, she can go down with them, but otherwise forget it, And I look over at the stage and they're falling about all over the place. It's like, oh, this looks a bit rough. So I said, well, why don't I give them a hand? And everyone, of course, laughed. They're all like, yeah. And so they thought it was a great joke. And they yell out to the crew. They go, hey, she's going to come and give you a hand, And the crew's like, oh, no. So I wander over there and, they teach me simple things like how to break down the drum kit. And I didn't damage anything or drop anything or hurt myself. So then they showed me how to coil a cable properly. And it's like, oh, she can do that as well. And then when it got to the point of loading the truck, it's like, no, I'll help. And then they went, they couldn't believe how strong I was. They're like, oh, she can lift anything we can, So from that one night, when they came back to town again, that's where I got my first gig. They came back with only one guy instead of two, and they just rang me and said, look, can you come down and help us out? And then, we did half a dozen shows in Sydney, and they said, look, this is working really well. Do you want to come to Melbourne? So that was the start of a career. It started off as a joke, really.
Trying to get your friend to ride.
Yeah.
Trying to get her out of town, exactly.
Could you paint us a bit of a picture of what the scene was like back then? Like, what were places like King's Cross and the Valley up in Brisbane like? Like, obviously that they've changed a lot to what they are now.
Yeah. The Valley was pretty rough, actually. I mean, I used to stay mostly around the town centre. I was just 15. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I went to a few clubs in the Valley, and I think one of my first experiences was watching someone OD, and we had to walk the guy, keep him walking and moving and stuff. So it was like, no, this isn't for me. I'm still going to get out of this one.
You're a red frog.
And then of course. Yeah. And then, of course, I go out of the pan into the fire with King's Cross. It's like, oh, Lord. And the cross was rough in those days.
Yeah.
I mean, it was heavy. It was heavy in a way that people just did not realise. You get all the R&R guys were still coming through, all the American soldiers and stuff, and they'd get in all sorts of trouble because they just didn't realise how feral Australians can be. And we're a pretty feral bunch, So, I got myself in trouble. I thought I was okay, and I was hanging out with all the locals, and I thought, oh, this is fun, until it turned a little serious, and then it was like, I got to get out of here. This is not good, or I'll end up spending my entire life here. And that wasn't something I wanted.
Well, yeah, last week we interviewed Father John from Wayside Chapel, and he actually, day to day works with the people that never left. So
absolutely,
sounds like you made the right call there.
Yeah. He's got a rough job, and it's been like that for decades.
Yeah, and they've just repealed the lockout laws, so it might King's Cross might make a return. So we'll see.
Oh wow, yeah, good time to leave. I'd have thought.
Hopefully, there's a happy medium that they can get to.
Yeah, ideally.
Now, you mentioned before that you kind of first got your taste with a tightrope walker you met, Philippe Petit, down in Nimbin. that sounds like a, just a passing kind of tangent in your story, but that actually was the festival that revolutionised Nimbin, wasn't it? The Aquarius Festival was kind of when the hippies first arrived there. They'd never actually... That was a timber lopping town in Nimbin before that festival, which you were actually at. So, that's almost a Woodstock moment. What could you tell us how you ended up there? Was that just a little Toowoomba girl jumped on a bus south, or...?
No, it was my Woodstock moment because when I was 11 years old in boarding school, I discovered Janis Joplin.
Right.
And I also then heard about Woodstock.
Yeah.
And in my 11-year-old mind, I thought I could go to Woodstock. So I'd called my father and said, I want to go to Woodstock. And everyone's like, you're insane, lock her up for the holidays, keep tabs on it. So I got grounded, obviously, and never was allowed to go. Obviously, no brainer to everyone except for me. But then when Nimbin came up, it's like, you know what? I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm just going to go because this is going to be my Woodstock, know. So that's what I did. I just packed a little bag and ran out of the house and never looked back. Went down there with a couple of other people and, it was put on by university students, Nimbin, and the reason why they picked Nimbin is because the town was dying. Yeah. It was almost a ghost town. It was in very bad condition. It was far enough away from all the capital cities to hopefully not draw enough attention, for it to get shut down or anything. And, the place where it was, it backed onto a national forest. And so it was out of the way, so that's the only way they could have pulled it off. But, I'm sure nobody had any idea of what they were creating at the time because it's still there. I mean, it's like, I'm kind of of two minds of it. I'd kind of love to go and see it, but then I'd kind of be a little scared in case, God forbid, I bumped into someone who I'd seen there. Oh my God, they're still there.
Yeah, probably sitting there working in the information centre. Still,
never left. It's like, oh my God,
telling you where you can go and find a vegan cigarette. It's still. I mean, people say, people like to say, oh, the cross has changed or the valley's changed or Nimbin's changed, but, the old heads are still there, especially the ones that kind of created these places. Now,
absolutely.
It seems like you had a sense of adventure from a young age, obviously, 11-year-old, already looking for your own Woodstock. Tell us, when you found yourself surrounded by these now historical, like iconic household names, these bands. Did you know it was happening when you were around these guys, when you were around Bon Scott and, and the other bands you ended up working alongside? Did you realise that I'm now working with someone who they're going to talk about for 100 years?
There was an energy in that room. I mean, I got taken to the house to meet them. They were just down there for a couple of days. It was before it was a full band, actually. I mean, there'd been a version of AC/DC, but this was Bonner just joined. There was Malcolm and Angus. There was Harry Bander and George Young. That was it in the house at the time, and they were just starting work on the first album. So I walked in, and they were all just standing around chatting. And it was kind of confusing to me because obviously Malcolm and Angus were close to my age, but the rest of them were much older, including Bon. Bon was more in the age group of Harry and George, but he was with Malcolm and Angus, So I sort of walked in and it's like, wow, what's going on here? I didn't quite get what was going on. And then I got introduced to everyone. And Brother George did that, actually. He took the lead, as he did, and he introduced me to everyone. So then it all fell into place of who was who. Within a few minutes, you could tell there was something really special going on here. And there was something that I definitely wanted to be a part of. And I was quite happy to leave the band I was with to become a part of this. It was more than just being able to live in the house and get away from my mother. It was like, there's something special here. And then once we started gigging and we got the other two members, we got Phil, and then eventually we got Mark. Then, once all five were together, it was like, there's no stopping these guys. I mean, the work ethic and the conviction from Mal was astronomical. I mean, it never faltered. It was like, this is it. This is what we're doing. This is where we are. And let's go. And that's where the 14 shows in a week came in, just whatever it took. I mean, we didn't do that every week, but we did it frequently.
And you're 17 at this point. You're not old enough to drink in pubs in half of the places you're visiting. Was that obviously a benefit to your career, the fact that you weren't allowed in with them afterwards?
No, because I never got carded once. I mean, I don't know if anybody even got carded in those days. I'm not sure. I used to run interference, actually, for Angus, who was a year older than me. Angus was actually 18. He was okay. I was the one that was underage, but police would turn up to sort of give Angus a hard time. And I'd sort of run interference and say, oh, come on, guys, let me buy you a drink at the bar. And then they'd go, I said, they can't get out of the dressing room. There's only one entrance. They've got to walk across the stage. We'll see them. But if you don't mind, I don't want to take you in there when they're all undressed and sweaty and stuff. That's not good for a girl. And they're like, oh, okay, sweetheart, yeah. So they'd take me over to the bar and we'd sit and have a drink. And then I'd say to them, they should be out any minute, but just in case, I think you should probably know you just bought me a drink and I'm only 17. And they'd go, oh. I said, but just between you and me, the good news is Angus is 18. And they're just like, So that was sort of the extra bits that you do for the band,
So what was the experience like? You're working and living with the same group of people day in and day out for months at a time. Did you ever find that just got to be a bit too much and you just had to go for a walk in the park on your own for an hour or two?
Not for a lot of years, no. I mean, I'd finally found, in my mind, a family unit. It was as near as I got to a family unit. So I was as happy as anything. I was just like, oh, this is fabulous. I finally got a bunch of people who I can think of as a family. And years down the road, when it gets a bit much, I would just get up and leave, but not come back. If I ever got up and went for a walk, it was like, oh, she's gone. But it would take a lot to get me to do that. But no, it was the family that I've been looking for, actually. I mean, and it just continued over the years with different crews and different bands and different production companies. It's as close as I've ever come. I mean, I do have two half sisters and two half brothers who only in the last couple of years I've been in touch with because, it was such a shattered family.
Yep.
So it's kind of interesting, but it's a little weird at this stage of the game, to be honest.
So where were you from?
Awkward.
Where were you from as a young young kid? Were you from Toowoomba or you were sent to Toowoomba as the nearest boarding school?
Yeah, I know. I started off in Brisbane and then my mother did a runner with me and one of my half-sisters when I was 4.
Okay.
So from the time I was 4 till the time I was 11, we travelled constantly up and down the east coast of Australia.
Right.
So, in that amount of time, by the time I went to boarding school, I'd already been to 11 different schools.
Okay, yep.
Which is a lot of schools, So the relationship with the mother was not good. And it got worse and it deteriorated really rapidly. So that's when my father came into the picture, that they decided that they had to send me to him because it was safer. Right. So that's when I went to boarding school because he'd been looking for this cute little 4-year-old that got taken away from him. And what he got back was a feral 11-year-old.
Yeah, right.
So he's like, ow.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe we should put her in a boarding school and take off some of those rough edges.
She's talking about Woodstock here. Yeah, we are.
That was after I'd started at boarding school. So he's like, oh, God, I'm wasting my money.
But it sounds like you did. I mean, it sounds like you did get a kind of taste for moving around and kind of meeting new people every night, every place you stayed. Did you?
Yeah, I mean, it came naturally.
Yeah, it came. So it did. Do you now have that kind of rapport where you can move in and out of a circle, with that kind of roadie mentality, where you might run into someone in 5 years and you've kind of nothing's changed and we're back at work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's an important part of my life, actually. It's a really good part of my life, and I think it's a special thing, and anyone who has that should be really, really grateful.
Can you tell us about when the first time came that you were taken on tour overseas? All of us know that AC/DC's, it's an Australian band, but what was it like to go overseas, for the first time?
Well, I went overseas separately to them. I actually left before they did.
Yep.
Because I'd already been working for international bands with Paul Dainty, the promoter.
Yep.
He had his own crew.
Yeah.
So from those shows, I did 6 tours in 7 months or something with Paul Dainty and around Australia for international bands. And out of that, I got offered a tour in the States, which was going to be Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder Review Part 2. They'd already done Part 1.
Yeah.
And what happened was that fell apart really. The promoter, it just went all wrong. So they called me and said, look, you shouldn't come because it's not going to last. And it only lasted, I think, 10 days or something. but I'd already had my mind set. So I said, well, I'm going anyway. So, I mean, I didn't go to America, though. I went to England.
Yeah.
So I went to England, and I just finished a tour with Status Quo in Australia. And they were in the States, but by the time they got back from the States, and I'd been starving on the streets for a couple of months in England, which wasn't very pleasant.
No.
It worked out that they were looking for someone to build their lighting system because they were buying their own lights and sounds. So, because they were going to be touring nonstop. And, you know, they appreciated me from the Australian tour. And again, my original mentor, Wayne Swampy Jarvis, was working for them directly now, living in England. So it was this big tie-in. So it was great. You know, it was like, again, it was like all familiar faces and we all knew each other. And finally I had a job and could get a roof over my head. So that was good too. That was a bonus because winter was starting. So that was really good. But that's how I started over there. And I worked with Quo for about 4 years. And then I moved on to a production company, and that's when I started working for multiple different bands.
The gun for hire kind of.
That's right,
situation.
yeah. I ended up actually taking Status Quo's lighting rig when they finally stopped touring and they were going to take a year off for tax reasons. I took that rig into a production company, and they'd only had sound systems up until that time. So now they could offer the full service of sound and lights.
Right.
And I ran the lighting rig department. So that way I never stopped working. So it was good. You know, it was good for the band. They were making money on the rig when they weren't working, and I was working nonstop, so I was making money. And I was getting promoted up the ladder as being in charge of a whole department. Yeah. So it was good all round.
So you had the keys to the kingdom. You knew how the lighting worked, and you could show these. I guess the whole industry was at that point climbing the ranks too, while you were climbing with it.
Everybody. And I think that may also have helped me because things were changing so dramatically and so quickly that everyone was scrambling to keep up. So they really didn't have time to look to the left and go, oh, God, is she still here?
Yeah.
They just had to, you know, and then it was like, oh, my God, what do you mean she's my boss?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
But, you know, you learn the best way to treat people and treat crews. You treat them well, and they'll go to the end of the world for you.
Now, you mentioned there Status Quo, AC/DC. I mean, before you were 21, there was Carlos Santana, Iggy Pop, Neil Diamond. Now we're going to ask some of the questions that I'm sure a lot of bratty kind of young blokes ask you. Who was the naughtiest?
Who was the naughtiest? Well, there was a few naughty ones there, and they were all naughty in their own ways. So Bon was the cheeky naughty one that would get away with blue murder and just flash his grin and wink at you and give you a hug and then run away. So he always got out of trouble. Then, funnily enough, Carlos Santana was quite cheeky as well, but he was so laid back and sort of cosmic that you didn't ever want to call him on it because he had that cool that vibe, you know. He was, so then Francis Rossi with Quo's a cheeky boy. He's definitely a cheeky boy, but the biggest brat factor, what I call a brat factor, I would say would be Iggy Pop.
Yeah, right.
Iggy's a bit of a brat when he wants to be.
High maintenance.
In a good way, though. I kind of like Iggy's brat factor as opposed to, say, Elton John's brat factor. Yeah. Not for me. Yeah. Okay. But Iggy's brat factor I can deal with and get a laugh out of.
Yeah.
So it's the difference between being a pest and being a princess.
I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't do tiaras.
But you kind of would have seen this partying that obviously has been mythologized by you know, fans of music, and everyone really likes to think that their favorite musician is the wildest bloke, you know, backstage. How did you kind of evade that kind of whirlpool, I guess you'd say, that, you know, that we have seen and read that a lot of musicians ended up in?
Oh, yeah.
You know, unfortunately, I didn't evade it very well at all. I pretty much dived right in. It was, you know, I mean, it's all there. It's all being offered. It's all free most of the time. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's, you know, the person you're working for goes, come on, we're going to the bar, and then we're going out to a party. And then it's like 2 a.m. and they're like, you're not going. You can't go. Come on, we're going to go do this now.
Yeah.
We're going to do this, and you can't it's kind of hard to say no.
Yeah.
No, I have to go to bed now because I've got to be up in 3 hours. You, on the other hand, don't have to be up for another 12 hours.
Yeah.
That's the tricky bit. That's the tricky bit, is finding that balance of how little sleep can you really survive on.
Who do you think's got the hardest job then on the road crew? I mean, like, who's got
Me. Seriously, they do say. I mean, lighting is. I mean, the riggers come in first and leave last, but they get to sleep all day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas a lighting crew and now video and stuff like that, it's pretty much the same thing. You start first, you've got the earliest calls, you don't stop all day, and then, you're pretty much the last ones out as well because you've got to wait for the rigging because that travels with you, with your truck. So, yeah, it is lighting. I mean, I didn't pick an easy job. We used to call the backline crew the country club.
Yep.
Because they just rock up in the afternoon, do the show, pack away a few boxes, and they'd be back on the bus, But if I was smart, I guess I probably should have stayed doing backline. But but no, I decided I'd do the hardest job or the longest job, put it that way.
Did you ever see any accidents?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, there was no health and safety whatsoever for decades. Decades. We're out there. And everything we used was an adaptation from something else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even, like the genie tower lifts that you wind up, they were meant to lift something just the size of the forks, not something that spanned 40 foot across a stage. So that was always playing like stress and stuff on the columns and things, You'd get up and everyone would be winding them up and it's all looking good. And then all of a sudden you see that 3 shafts are stuck together on one of them and it just crashes, boom. And the whole thing goes, boom, and if there's someone up there on it, it's like really scary, Stages collapsed. We had a rigger fall out of the roof at Wembley, Empire Pool. That was tragic. He did survive. But again, the motors, the chain motors that are used in rigging were converted and run upside down. Yeah. So you would have a problem. With oil and stuff.
Yeah.
And if it gets on the chain and you're climbing on the chain, you're going to slip.
Yeah.
So there was always something. That you had to be beware of. And usually it wasn't something you did yourself. It was usually something that was already there or something that had been adapted and you're told, oh, yeah, the stage is up, it's fabulous, Well, it is until you step onto it.
Yeah. Off the stage, are these people who go out on stage in front of tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, are they, in your opinion, just like a regular person when they're not doing that? I mean, like, or are they always on?
Some of them are on more than others, but I gravitate to a certain sort of person, naturally, and like whether in any social situation, whether it's like on a tour or off a tour, and I tend to go for the brain. So I like to be able to have a good conversation about anything. I mean, for example, like Whitesnake. I'm on a Whitesnake tour. David Coverdale's the star, obviously, and he's a darling. We'd hang out in bars and stuff. I'd be his sidekick, when he's pulling girls, because he'd say it was better if he had a girl with him. They'd trust him more. It's like, you're making a traitor out of me. but if I wanted to actually like hang out and have a conversation and stuff, I'd go to John Lord. Because like him and I'd share like the Sunday crossword puzzle, and we talk about all sorts of things. So it just depends. Some of them don't turn off, and that's really unfortunate. It depends what they're doing, I mean, you've got to realize 70s, 80s, even into the early 90s, cocaine was just out of control. Yeah. Everyone was doing it all over the place. The only thing that changed in the 90s is they lied and said they weren't doing it, but they still were.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where it seems to be harmless for a while, but then all of a sudden you start getting out of control, and you can tell that. You can notice it on crews. You notice it within band members, and that's when it gets a little nasty, a little ugly, because who's going to tell the person you can't do that? Because whoever tells them you can't do that's going to get fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So It's tough. It should have been a manager's position or, get him a babysitter, do whatever, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
It should never really be the crew's job to do it,
Yeah.
because it's tough. It breaks that bond. There's like an unwritten bond between a crew member and a band member that they know that they can trust you and say anything and it won't go any further.
Yeah.
And I've been careful with that in this book. I think I've been respectful to that.
Yeah.
I've told a lot of fun stories and stuff, but, if someone wants to dish dirt, they can do that themselves. So it's not my job. So it's tough, when someone starts spinning out of control. It's how do you handle it? Elton, when I was with Elton, unfortunately, that was what he was doing. He was spinning out of control and it got really ugly. It got ugly to the point that I just didn't want to be there anymore. So it's tough.
You mentioned, there's obviously a lot of health and safety hazards that you kind of lived through that a lot of people nowadays wouldn't have to really even consider. And as you said, a lot of this is all in your book, Loud. The new book you've just written, Loud, which is telling all of these stories and respectfully so, as you mentioned. You don't exactly name names, but another health and safety kind of element, or at least a workplace element that is mentioned in your book, is that you were doing this and you were the only kind of female on the ground as a part of the team 40 years before the Me Too movement. And at that same time, there was, I guess, probably the peak of the idea of groupies, and following bands. How did you deal with that dynamic as, a trusted kind of confidant of musicians with a bunch of young girls backstage and this is the most important night of their life?
Yeah, in the beginning, when I was really young and starting out, it was the girls that wanted to get backstage that gave me a hard time. They kind of saw me as like an obstacle, so to speak. Mm-hmm. As I got older and more established, and I guess climbed up the ladder a bit and was working for multiple different bands, I'd find that wives and girlfriends would befriend me, and it's like, why are you befriending me? I just you're wearing really expensive clothes and fake breasts, and I've just loaded 10 trucks. What do we have in common here? They want to know what their husband or boyfriend's been doing out on the road, and it's like, that's not my job. You're asking the wrong person here. Please don't put me in that position because it's not going to end well for you. So as I got more established, that would be it. And as far as girls coming to meet bands and stuff, I'd see them walking by and stuff, but they would, I'd be too busy. It's like I'd be a constant moving target. So, you see them, but, I would always physically stay away from that because that was kind of my biggest fear, was to be typecast as someone who was just doing the job because she wanted to, land a musician or whatever. So I was really sensitive to that, but I've met some of the girls over the years that are well-known groupies, I guess you call them, and they're actually really nice girls. They're really nice girls, a lot of them, and they just love musicians. So we all might judge. It's not.
No different to men acting giggly when their favourite footballer walks in the pub.
Exactly. Or what never gets talked about, men groupies. That never gets discussed. And they're out there. They are out there.
With a texter in hand in an airport near you.
Exactly.
No, obviously life goes on for you as well alongside this. I mean, how are you balancing that work-life balance throughout your career? On the road is a lifestyle, but you've also got a life outside of that.
I really didn't. I would tour like 11 months a year at least.
Right, okay.
And so my whole environment was people I either knew through work or worked with or had worked with, and that was how it was. And that's the same for a lot of crew people. You get in this and it is, the cliche word is it's a bubble, but you're in that bubble and you find you only ever speak to people who do that job, who are either musicians or are production crew. And it's awkward talking to people outside of that because they usually want something. They're like, oh, you do that. Can I come to the show? Or can you get me an autograph? Or, can I have an album? Or, and it's like, well, no, no. And I would never do that. I would never go to a band and say, can you give me an autograph for someone? I always felt, because again, it was that girl going to a band member asking for that. I just didn't want to do it. So it was like, you got the wrong person. Don't ask me to do that. I can't do that. I never did it for myself, so I wasn't going to do it for someone else, you know. So it's tough, you know. That becomes your whole world. And it's also a troubling thing when people retire, when they stop touring, because they haven't known any other life.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's an incredibly high suicide rate with crew people.
Right.
I don't know if you're aware of that.
No.
But there was a survey done not so long ago, and they were saying that at least 19% of all crew people that were spoken to for this survey admitted to feeling suicidal within the last 12 months.
Right.
And that was before COVID. That was nothing to do with COVID. So it's an incredibly high risk job, and it's a stressful job. And that's a side that people don't ever really see. And that's sort of a bit of the side that I wanted to show, that these people do really work hard, you know, and they do give their all to it.
Yeah.
How did you find adapting to the settled life when you pulled up stumps? I mean, at some capacity throughout, you know, your life. I'm not sure if you still you've got one more world tour in you with someone like AC/DC reunion. I mean, those guys will never stop. But how did you find adapting to you know, to the? I mean, I don't imagine you went. I don't imagine you went full white picket fence. You didn't go full white picket fence and pull up in the suburbs, I imagine. But but you did settle down.
Suburbs are not for me. Suburbs are not for me. What I did is I kept evolving throughout my career.
Yeah.
So what I do is I changed job as things were needed. You know, like I had a son and I couldn't tour. So instead of touring, or like I couldn't go out on a 12-month tour or an 18-month tour. So I did logistics instead. So with logistics, what you're doing is you're taking care of several bands at the same time, and you're doing all of their customs for all their equipment. You're chartering air freight planes and ocean containers and travel logistics, and you're doing all of that. And so you're still doing an incredibly important job, and a job that really nobody on the crew understands even. But what they do is, and it's the good thing was that I'd come up through the ranks. So they felt safe handing the equipment over, because the last thing a crew person ever wants to do is give the band's equipment over to somebody.
Yep.
You know, they're like, that's my responsibility. You know what I mean? But it was like, because I knew what was in the cases and I knew the equipment and I knew all the different departments because I'd worked in them, then, you know, I became quite successful at that and had quite a successful company for a while. And, you know, so that was a really good thing. So, you know, just evolving to me is something, you know, I always had in my mind that I thought, you know, it's not a good look to see a woman loading a truck when she's 50 years old. You know, it's bad enough watching a guy do it when they're 50, but to see a woman, is it any different? No, it's just my personal thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be doing it. You know what I mean? So I've always evolved, you know, and then I evolved to, you know, non-profits for putting music back into schools, doing that sort of thing, and then writing the book. So, you know, I've been incredibly busy and very fortunate, actually, even through times of COVID, you know, to have this going on during COVID is, you know, it's a distraction. Hopefully people will see it as a distraction. They can read and they can get a bit of enjoyment out of it and think of the time when it's all going to come back and it's going to be real again. You know, that's hopefully what we can get from this.
Yeah. Well, we're glad, Tana, that the stories have been told. You know, we're glad that you've written it down, and, you know, we've had a great chat today, and those listening can find all this and more, a lot more in your new book, Loud. You know, you're obviously an icon to the industry, and, you know, you mentioned to us and by some musicians who, you know, obviously think the world of you, and all this is in the book. So we look forward to reading and hearing a lot more from you. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.